Once upon a time, before anyone had the thought to measure it, there was a town, and another, and another, and another one still. They sat comfortably beside a meandering river. The river flowed gently through honey-burnt, golden fields of tall grass, and through luscious pastoral mint hues of tree, and it commanded for itself a sense of respect. The towns were small, that was true, but comfortable for the people who lived in them, and they were happy to live beside such a beautiful river, and such beautiful fields, and such beautiful trees. But there was another presence in their midst. They were scared by it. They lived in the shadow of a mountain, tall and winding, and jagged with a snow-capped peak, and a gray trail that twisted around its crooked body. And every so often, a massive figure would emerge at the top of the mountain. It blocked the sun whenever it had the chance to, and every so often it would rumble, letting out whatever mysterious essence flowed through it. The people of the towns decided to name it Elsket. No one ever went onto the mountain's spindly spires and suspicious columns of rock, lest they be greeted by that enigmatic giant. And even though they were afraid of Elsket and its menacing and deranged earthen blood, they respected it, and they respected how it brought them together in their fear. For in the shadow of Elsket, all men, all women, all children, and all beings were equal. As to a dog, all food is food, and to a bird, all ants are ants. But the towns were not always in the shadow, and when they weren't, they did not treat themselves as equals. They fought amongst each other, over whose land was whose, and whose truths were the right truths, and so on and so forth, and they killed each other. As the years went on, none that anyone had thought to record, and as the towns grew bigger, so did Elsket's shadow, and the people of one town found themselves always trapped within it, as they were at the base of the mountain. One of those years, a boy was born. He was given the name Rolf, and of course, he was taught from an early age to respect Elsket, because, in his shadow, he made them equal. But as time passed, and Rolf found himself aging, the people of his town began to resent Elsket and its shadow. Because of the shadow, they couldn't fight for new land, and they couldn't spread their truths through arguments or violence. Their growth was stunted. They became poor and bitter. Rolf, of course, began to notice this hatred, and he, as an impressionable young boy, began to hate Elsket himself. As more time passed still, the other towns expanded further, while the serene nature around them withered, hollowed by the touch of their progress. They developed weapons and books. Their ideas spread like decrepit rot on a trickle-down, torn-up tree trunk, as did their land grow. And soon, not even Elsket's shadow could cover them. Instead, they were always in the beating heat of the sun. It warmed their blood. It made it hot with ambitious passion. But Rolf, who was an able-bodied young man at this point, did not see his town growing, did not see his town feeling the same warmth of the sun. The fields they used to sow became so overworked, shriveled and damp. What before could have supported the growth of fruit so sweet it would make spoiled birds sing, had long been forgot on the palates of their thirsty tongues. And while no one starved, no one truly felt full. So Rolf decided he would go to the top of the mountain, he would find a way to talk to Elsket if he could, or kill Elsket if he had to, so the people of his town wouldn't have to live in its shadow, and they could take land and spread their truths and have interesting food. In the middle of a cloudless night, with the shining of a million stars to guide his way in cold pale light, he left with a weapon, a sickle for harvesting whatever measly grain they could, a backpack filled with soggy and nearly expired bread, and a canteen only a third filled with water. As Rolf climbed up the twisting spirals on the trail, his boots sinking precariously into the loose soil with each step, he couldn't help but feel himself transported to another world. Animals he had never seen before, trees towering taller than the giant itself and arranged in massive groves of green and glowing light, specks of luminescence flying in the air at his face, and fruit so sweet it could make spoiled birds sing. He approached one of the trees and had his first bite of fruit in what felt like 4 lifetimes, and its sweet nectar flowed so graciously down his throat, he felt blessed to be a pioneer of this unearthly flavor. The mountain was beautiful. He had climbed for hours, and hours turned into a day, and for once he had felt the sun's warmth on his face. But he didn't forget what he came onto the mountain for, and in all its terrifying beauty, he knew he had to keep climbing. He climbed until it got colder, and he climbed until the air got thinner, until finally the ground became white and softer than the soil before, until finally he was at the top of the wicked mountain. He looked down on the land below, and he saw his town at the mountain's base, and he saw how small it was for the first time. Nothing more than a grain of sand in a pail of dirt. He saw the other towns, nothing more than 2 grains of sand in the same pail of dirt. He saw their twisted fields, their libraries, and their armies. It was interesting. Rolf was finally seeing just how small everything was from the tallest point in the world, and yet something that small made himself feel infinitesimally smaller. Then without warning, he heard a rumbling, and he fell to the cold mountain floor, and a shadow blocked out his sun. He gripped his sad sickle and turned around to see Elsket. The giant was as big as he thought he would be, towering stories high, made out of rock, and earth, and moss, and snow. It was horrible and raw beauty personified. The giant bent onto its knee, and looked at Rolf with its infinitely cold charcoal eyes. "What do we have here?" the giant spoke, its deep voice booming through the mountain air. "My name is Rolf," said Rolf the human. "I've come to talk to you, or kill you, giant," he said, clutching his sickle. The giant was perplexed. "My town can't expand because of your shadow." "And why is that?" "We can't fight for more land." "And why is that?" "Because we are equal in your shadow." "That is truth." There was a pause, and the brisk air that went through Rolf's hair whistled and laughed. "Am I equal to you in your idea of me?" the giant asked. Rolf paused, and a peculiar glow billowed from the giant's eyes. "An idea is just an idea, don't you know? A truth can be a truth, or it can be far removed from it. You think me a colossus, do you not?" questioned the giant. "Well, yes," Rolf explained, "because you tower over us." "Why do you only consider yourselves equal to each other when I tower over you? Why should my shadow have any relevancy to how you all behave?" Rolf thought for a moment. "Because you remind us that we are small." The giant chuckled, and then he let out a deep, billowing sigh. "Oh, Rolf, if only you could understand how small I feel sometimes." "Giant, you have no idea," Rolf said. To this, the giant chuckled another time, and the mountain rumbled. The giant reached out with its earthy hand. It picked up Rolf. It lifted him high into the air. "Look and listen, Rolf. Really listen." So Rolf hushed and listened. He heard screams. He heard vicious clashing metal and neighing horses, shouts of confusion and anger. He heard people cursing the sun, cursing that they couldn't be in Elsket's shadow, cursing the way things were. Rolf saw fires spewing in the towns and water flowing delicately through the earth. He saw how big the land really was, how serenely beautiful it was, how it stretched for rivers upon rivers of length, even disappearing off, far into the corner of the earth. Rolf thought how Elsket himself could probably see much further than he could. Elsket could see much more emptiness, much more stretching of rivers and trees. The giant lowered Rolf back to the mountaintop, and Rolf sat stunned. How lucky they were to be in the shadow of Elsket. "Why don't you put them in your shadow, so they don't have to suffer?" Rolf asked. "I've thought about that." The giant stretched as high as he could. His shadow didn't even touch the closest town in the sunlight. "I am not big enough to cover all of them. Even in my size, I am still too small," Rolf thought to himself. He thought about his town's fields, and he thought about the bread in his bag. He took it out and gave it a look, and suddenly it didn't look as bad as it looked before. It wasn't soggy, and maybe even if it didn't have the color of those golden bundles of wheat the other towns had, he wouldn't know if it tasted any worse. "So, what is the solution here, giant?" Rolf asked. Elsket shrugged its mountainous shoulders and leaned in close to Rolf's ear. It whispered something, and Rolf smiled. The two gave each other one last look, a nod of understanding, and a goodbye, although maybe not final. Rolf walked down the mountainside and watched as it glowed and buzzed with its own alien kind of life. He'd missed the thickets of thick-framed plant life, and animals too great for the imagination to conjure up, and while he was sad to leave the oasis on that terrifying mountain, Rolf was excited to tell his town what they wouldn't do.